From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. U.S. reaches $88 million settlement with black victims of white supremacists. France has shut down 92 mosques and announces closure of 7 more. New report says 4 U.S. intel outfits failed to foresee Kabul's hasty collapse. Controversial Sri Lankan monk heads legal reform panel. The U.S. Justice Department announced an $88 million settlement Thursday with victims of a white supremacist who murdered 9 African Americans in a historic South Carolina church. The settlement ranges from $6 million to $7.5 million for relatives of 9 victims of the 2015 massacre at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. It will also give $5 million to each of the 5 survivors. The settlement stems from allegations that the FBI was negligent when it failed to prohibit the sale of a gun by a licensed firearm dealer to the killer, Dylan Roof. Prosecutors say that Roof carried out the massacre to spark a race war. He's facing the death penalty. Attorney General Merrick Garland called the mass shooting a horrific hate crime, causing immeasurable suffering for victims' families and survivors. Ileana Pinckney, whose mother, South Carolina State Senator Clementa Pinckney, was killed in the church attack. She had this to say.
And my sister and I are going to go home realizing that the government didn't sit in silence, but they paid attention. And they valued my father's life. And they valued the lives of the 8 other people who died. And my father is not the only one. This is a step in the right direction for the government to continue acknowledging the African Americans who are losing their lives on a daily basis. This is the start to change.
This is a hopeful step in the right direction. Opening statements began Thursday in a civil lawsuit filed against the organizers of a 2017 Unite the Right rally that turned violent in Charlottesville, Virginia. 1 person died and dozens were injured in the ensuing chaos as white nationalists, white supremacists, and counter-protesters clashed. The rally was to protest the removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The violence peaked when a protester, James Fields, drove his car through a crowd of counter-protesters. Dozens were injured and 32-year-old Heather Heyer was killed. Fields is serving 2 concurrent life sentences. Plaintiffs include residents and counter-protesters injured in 2 days of clashes. They're seeking compensation and statutory damages for physical and emotional injuries. U.S. Congresswoman Betty McCollum has introduced a resolution condemning Israel for designating 6 prominent Palestinian NGOs and groups as terrorist organizations. The resolution calls Tel Aviv's decision repressive and designed to criminalize and prosecute important Palestinian human rights organizations. It also urges the House of Representatives to recognize the valuable work of the 6 groups singled out by Israel. McCollum said that the U.S. invests billions of taxpayer dollars to support Israel's security and not its system of occupation and repression of Palestinians. McCollum urged House Democrats and the Biden administration to denounce anti-democratic repression of Palestinian civil society. The resolution's 9 co-sponsors include Representatives Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Andre Carson, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Analyses by 4 U.S. intelligence agencies indicated the Taliban would gain ground against since disposed upon government. Yet none could predict the Kabul government's imminent collapse, according to a report published Thursday. The Wall Street Journal reviewed nearly 24 assessments in the 4 agencies. They found that the Afghan government was unlikely to survive without U.S. aid, but they differed on its longevity. A May 17th CIA report determined the government would fall by year's end. Less than a month later, another assessment said that the Taliban would take full control of the country within 2 years. India's opposition Congress Party on Monday accused Facebook of fomenting communal hatred and influencing elections in the country. Party leaders demanded a joint parliamentary committee probe into the allegations. They say Facebook has acted as an ally of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP. They also questioned why the social media platform did not designate RSS and Bajrang Dal as dangerous organizations. Both extremist Hindu groups are known for their violent attacks on Dalits, Muslims, and Christians. Congress spokesman Pawan Khaira said the latest Facebook expose based on leaked internal reports suggests the company was pushing the BJP's agenda. Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen claimed the company took no decisive action against the perpetrators of hate posts in Hindi and Bengali. India is Facebook's largest market with about 370 million users of the platform. Facebook India has not responded to these allegations. 3 Pakistani police officers were killed and 80 more injured when supporters of a banned party opened fire at them on Wednesday, the country's interior minister said. Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan was protesting the imprisonment of its leader Saad Rizvi. It is also demanding that France's ambassador to Pakistan be expelled. This is for the French president's support for the publication of disrespectful caricatures mocking Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The latest demonstration began on Friday in the group's stronghold city of Lahore. Thousands of people have begun slowly moving the protest towards the capital, Islamabad. Police have closed off major roads and junctions leading to the capital. French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin on Tuesday said that the government plans to close 7 more mosques and Islamic associations nationwide by the end of 2021. The minister said 13 Muslim organizations have been closed since President Emmanuel Macron took office. Under the pretext of fighting radicalism, the government is waging an Islamophobic campaign against the country's Muslim population, according to critics. 92 of the 2,500 mosques in the country were closed as a result of inspections, Dramanin said. He added that since September 2020, resident permits of 36,000 foreigners have been canceled due to what he called a threat to the public. A Buddhist monk accused of fanning sectarian hatred will head a new presidential task force on legal reforms in Sri Lanka, a country fractured by ethnic and religious tensions. The task force is called One Country, One Law, and was a slogan for President Rajapaksa's campaign in 2019. Ginasara Thero has been accused of instigating hate crimes against minority Muslims in the Buddhist majority country. He has close ties with Wirathu, an extremist monk based in Burma. Sri Lanka's 13-member presidential task force has no representatives from the Tamil ethnic minority, but it does include 4 Muslims, the country's second largest minority. There are no women on the committee. The panel was announced Tuesday and is given 4 months to complete a report. It was set up to replace special laws governing marriage and inheritance for Sri Lankan minorities, as well as some laws targeting the majority Sinhalese. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment on President Biden's economic plan. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September. I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Welcome back. To discuss President Biden's economic plan in detail, let's now go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. President Biden delivered a speech to the nation, and he has come up with $1.75 trillion package. Within that package, more than $600 billion are for Social Security, essentially parenting and family, investment in human resources, and slightly less, $550 billion for climate change. That defines 2/3 of the plan which he announced. I don't know whether it will pass or not, but what is the wisdom behind that? Will it work? Will it save the climate? Or will it help families actually produce wealth? To discuss with that is someone who has been with us before, a Professor Fadil Kabul. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome to Muslim Network TV. Dr. Kabul is president of Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Tell us, based on your modern monetary theory, I believe you're happy with $1.75 trillion Biden plan.
Actually, not really, because when it comes to the climate change challenges that we have, the economic inequality challenges that we have, the socioeconomic exclusion challenges that we've had for a long time, $1.75 trillion sounds like a large number if it was my mortgage or your mortgage, but for the U.S. federal government, it's actually insufficient in terms of intervention. Let's also not forget that we're talking about spending of $1.75 trillion over a 10-year period. This is not going to be a one-year spending. So it adds up to actually $175 billion per year for the next 10 years, which is insignificant given the size of the U.S. economy, given the size of the problem that we're dealing with. And I think this is a communication problem that the Democrats and President Biden in particular have failed to deliver when they started talking about the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better infrastructure plan. Instead of saying it's $350 billion a year, they started saying it's $3.5 trillion, and everybody thought it was unbelievably large number. I'll give you an example just to illustrate how insignificant this level of spending is. There's a study done a couple of years ago by the Union of Concerned Scientists looking at just the climate change impact on real estate properties in the US, only in coastal cities. And they picked the year 2045 as a target year for this study. Why 2045? Because if you sign a mortgage today, a 30-year mortgage, 2045 is on your mortgage. So the climate risks of flooding, of sea level rises, of storms is actually on the books for those mortgages. And they estimated that the climate change impact on those properties is $1 trillion. This is just one small item. add the forest fires, as the damage to agriculture and crops and cities and infrastructure, we're not even close in terms of mitigating the climate risks with this spending. Yes, it's a step in the right direction. Yes, it does include people as infrastructure, not just roads and highways. Yes, it does include a little bit of tax credits and incentives to decarbonize transportation, but it's not the bold climate action agenda that we actually need.
So $555 billion, which this plan has, in your view, is not sufficient at all? Is it halfway through? It's just 10% in the right direction? What will it take? Because climate is going to be a very serious issue. I mean, it's not just the government and the scientists and the data crunchers. It is the bankers and the industry who have started crying out. Are they responding to the noise created by academicians, or they are really doing their math?
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction. For example, in order to really create the incentives and to make the economics work for decarbonizing transportation and moving to electric cars, one of the most important things that the industry has been talking about is building the infrastructure for charging stations. Thousands and thousands of those charging stations all over the country, in the same way that we have gas stations today. So this bill includes funding for that. So I think that will be significant. The tax credits for buying electric cars, the tax credits for energy efficiency, those things are important. But in terms of switching the electric grid to 100% renewables, the timeline is good, but not good enough. The investments in research and development, especially for battery storage, for material science research to produce much more efficient consumer goods in terms of their climate impact, that is not as bold as what we would hope for, and not investing enough in decarbonizing electricity production, moving away from coal, moving away from natural gas, fracking. We're just not looking at the actual costs for us in terms of human health, in terms of environmental impact of fracking. Fracking continues to be part of the Biden administration energy policy, and I think that's a big mistake in the long term.
What about does this plan, if money which is being decided, I mean, it is half of what President Biden originally wanted because of the political realities that even senators, Democratic side, are not going to vote for it. So though he reduced it substantially, but what about giving incentives to soon-to-be trillionaires like Elon Musk and bozos of the world who are leaving our planet? What about giving them enough incentive to, instead of we putting all the electric pumping stations, let them build some of that and benefit from it?
Well, this is a part of the problem, is that for decades we've abdicated the responsibility of the federal government and we've handed it to corporations and to the oligarchs. So I don't think we should continue to do that. If anything, recognizing the power of the purse that the federal government has, and spending directly on building resources, creating jobs, and building the right infrastructure that we need, should be the priority. Instead, if you notice, a lot of the spending that the federal government does is relying on the private sector responding to incentives, or relying on the private sector to provide the goods and services with tax credits and tax incentives, as opposed to direct spending in terms of building the resources. That is a philosophical shift that we need to undertake, and we're not there. We're not there yet. The big problem with the political constraint, as you described it, in terms of senators like Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema from Arizona, who have been really the two key senators standing in the way of more spending on this issue. I think the Biden administration and the Democratic Party in general have set up the terms of the debate that led them to this failure. That is to say, they wanted from the beginning to introduce a bill that would completely, quote unquote, pay for itself. They wanted to introduce a bill that demonstrates that they're fiscally responsible. And that's how they set up a trap for themselves to have the more fiscally conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and the Republicans to say, well, this is too much spending. We can't afford this. How are you going to pay for it? You need to show me how you're going to balance the books, which means you either increase taxes, which many of them oppose, or you reduce the spending, which eventually is what they got. They substantially reduced the spending. And that's how the bill failed, in my view, failed from the initial goal of 3.5 trillion, which was good, but again, a step in the right direction, but probably should have been the first step and several steps in this direction. But now we're not even sure about 1.75 billion, if it's actually going to go through completely or if it's going to be trimmed a little bit in the next few days with further negotiations.
Professor Kabul, there is, within this plan, he has on parenting $600 billion, 400 for, kindergarten, universal pre-kindergarten, and 200 billion for expanded tax credit for parents. So $600 billion investment in human development. Do you think it is enough to have an impact on the economy?
Yeah. So the investment in universal pre-K and tax credits for parents, this has been long overdue. There's been at least 3 decades worth of research showing how important it is to invest in early childhood education. As a matter of fact, the investments pay off over a lifetime in terms of better performance at school, in terms of higher productivity, higher earnings, well-being, health effects. All of these things are negative effects that we as a society pay for over time. So it's long overdue. It's a step in the right direction. And it's important to have it. So I'm glad that it's included. But I'm not, I wouldn't say that we've achieved everything we wanted to achieve, because not only is this important for parents to be able to go back to work after COVID, but it's also very important for women in particular to be able to go back to the workforce if they wanted to have that option. So it's extremely important for the economy, for families, for their well-being, and for children, of course.
So, Professor Kabul, in your thought, it is a step in the right direction, but neither it will help the climate change handle it more aggressively, because that's sort of a time bomb which is already unleashed. I mean, it is already having impact. I mean, I was reading stories about what's happening in Somalia, in Bangladesh. People are losing their land to water, and they're sitting in ghettos, in shanty towns over there. So this thing is happening now. Do you think overall, which country in the world gets it? Who is willing to commit the type of resources which are needed to handle this issue?
Well, unfortunately, we're collectively, as a globe, we're not there yet. So, for example, when you think of the largest emitters of CO2, it's the US, it's the European Union, and it's China in recent years, in the last couple of decades. But the historical emissions, by far, the US is the most responsible, followed by Europe, and China is catching up, giving its massive emissions in recent years. But you have to take into account that countries like China and India also, that's catching up in terms of massive CO2 emissions. It's not CO2 emissions for their own consumption. It's really because they're the manufacturers for the whole planet. So their CO2 emissions is to produce items that are consumed mostly in the global north. So we have a moral, ethical responsibility to pay for the damage, to transfer technology to the global south, to transfer financial resources to help the global south in particular build a greener, more sustainable, more resilient economies with food security and renewable energy security, because you can't really run an economy without food, without energy. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Where we are today is that we're on track to continue to extract fossil fuels at a rate that is 120% higher than where we should be if we were to meet the 1.5 degree global warming by the end of the century. So we're on a dangerous path. Right now, we are on track, given the current commitments, to a global warming of 2.9 degrees, which is way above the upper limit that scientists have put on the table for us, which is a maximum of 2 degrees. So we're not even close. The other problem is the climate financing that I talked about. The transfer of financial resources from global north to global south has been insufficient, embarrassingly insufficient. Case in point, the Global Climate Fund that was supposed to have $100 billion per year for climate financing for the global south, not only did it not reach the $100 billion total. I checked 2 days ago, and it had $10 billion in it. Not even close to helping the global south transition. So we're really on a dangerous path, and the U.S. commitment is really primarily commitment to rebuild its own infrastructure on a slightly more decarbonized, more resilient basis, but it's not even looking at its historic role in CO2 emissions and the damage that the U.S., that the European Union in particular have done in the global south in terms of extraction of resources and CO2 emissions. Collectively, the most vulnerable nations on the planet who are on the front lines of climate change, collectively, they have emitted less than 3% over the centuries since the Industrial Revolution, less than 3% of CO2 emissions. So it's a moral, ethical responsibility for the countries that have caused the problems, that continue to cause the problem, to actually pay for the damage, repair the damage with financial resources, technological resources, and broader economic cooperation to help us transition to a more sustainable global economy. And this is not kind of every country for themselves, because as a globe, we're either going to float or we're going to sink collectively. So it's not like the US and Europe will save themselves and the rest of the world will feel the pain. Sure, in the beginning, this is where most of the damage is, but eventually, this is a global phenomenon. All countries will suffer.
Thank you so much for your time, although I feel very terrible about the picture which you're depicting, but which is probably more realistic of what is happening. If we are not going to help the global south in deal with the problem, which are economically developing, which has just 10% of the yearly commitment, or is it the 10% overall of 100 billion a year? Thank you so much for
10 billion overall. Yeah, we're not even close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kabul.
My pleasure.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Dr. Fadil Kabul. For the sake of the country, let's hope they get this bill passed. That's all from our Washington studio tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.